March 25th, 1979. Mr. Robert Allore. Dear Sir, pursuant to our recent telephone conversation, you will find attached our invoice for long-distance telephone charges incurred since our last invoice, January 31st, 1979. As previously stated, I'm not including any charges for the work which I performed on my own since that date. I am maintaining a personal interest in the resolution of this case and will be happy to assist you in any other way you see fit. In the meantime, you will find attached a photocopy of an article which appeared in the Montreal Star, which briefly describes the conflict involving the Quebec police force and myself. Leo Hamel has assured me that I still can count on his cooperation and his assistance in the future, and therefore my present difficulty should not hinder any further investigation on the matter which concerns you. Yours truly, Robert M. Bulak, Director, Metropole Bureau of Investigation. At the conclusion of the Fernand Laplante trial, the Sûreté de Quebec had private investigator Robert Bulak arrested for impersonating a police officer to residents of Astbury Road during the experiment where he proved that a gun was not fired at the location the night of the Grimard and Bergeron murders. The charges were retaliation for Bulak having filed a complaint with the Quebec Police Commission alleging that provincial police officers had beaten suspects, intimidated witnesses, and fabricated evidence during investigations of crimes in and around the Eastern Townships city of Sherbrooke. Bulak had documented several beatings by SQ agents and against township residents. Specifically, he cited SQ investigators for having savagely beaten Fernand Laplante on several occasions during his initial arrest between August 3rd and 5th, 1978. He charged that the Sûreté du Québec engaged in acts of brutality, intimidation towards defense witnesses, elaborating that an investigator had twisted the breasts of Laplante's wife, Claire Dussault. Bulak further alleged investigators made inappropriate casual conversation with the jury during Laplante's trial. Robert Bulak was just one of many in a long queue of Quebecers demanding justice from Minister Marc-André Bedard in 1979. The father of Diane Deary, murdered with Mario Corbet, petitioned Bedard over his daughter's botched investigation. Before the close out of the year, Bedard had to order an investigation into the SQ police shooting of David Cross on the Gananoque Reserve south of Montreal. The problem is the provincial police in the Sherbrooke area cannot solve cases by the normal methods, so they have started using shortcuts. Robert Bulak, Sherbrooke Record, August 31st, 1979. This is who killed Teresa. Frustrated by the lack of cooperation he was receiving from local police and Champlain College administration, in the wake of Teresa's disappearance, my father hired Robert Bulak. If Bulak believed his conflict with the SQ wouldn't hinder his work on Teresa's case, he was dead wrong. Rather than cutting through the fog of her disappearance, Bulak's imposing presence in the field was one more obstacle that got in the way of a proper investigation. Not that that mattered much anyway, as we now see that the SQ, or QPF as the English called them, had little interest in solving crimes against women. Charles Marion was a big deal. Raymond Grimard was big cheese. But Manon Bergeron, who was found with him, was fifth business as far as the police were concerned, most often referred to as Grimard's concubine or his bitch. And Carol Facteau, as I've said before, true crime jetsam, an afterthought. Did she even get a trial? We'll come to that. The acrimony between Bulak and police was so corrosive they couldn't even stand to be in the same room together and at least feign civility and cooperation in the face of the stress and grief my parents were under. I once remarked to Bob Bulak about a meeting that occurred between my parents, Lennoxville Police Chief Leo Hamel, and SQ Caporal Roch Goudreau that took place at the Montreal Airport Hilton on the one-year anniversary of Therese's disappearance. I mistakenly suggested that the private detective had been there as well, to which Bulak interjected, "No, that never happened." When I asked him how he was so sure, he replied, flat, "'Cause if Rocky walked in the front door of the Hilton, I would have immediately got up and walked out the back door." Jean Charland's trial for the first-degree murders of Raymond the Wolf Grimard and Manon Bergeron was finally heard in the fall of 1979, 5 months after the conviction of his so-called accomplice, Fernand Laplante, who by now is serving his life sentence for murders. Many of the same cast of characters were brought before Judge Carrier-Fortin. An entire morning was spent on Luc Landry's juvenile record, how at 16 he had held up a Compton credit union, and his Thunder Bay conviction for failure to pay for a sandwich. SQ Officer Réal Chateauneuf testified that he recovered a birch log on January 8, 1979, under a staircase in the basement of Charland's home in Lennoxville, which contained 69 rounds of ammunition. One round that managed to be identifiable matched 4 rounds recovered from Grimard's body. It's hard to imagine why Charland would feel the need to conceal evidence that pointed to a weapon used, according to police and Charland, by Laplante to gun down Grimard. And recall that from Charland's own testimony, the murder weapon would have been retrieved from his house on the night of the murders, but then used by Laplante, or so he said. On October 3rd, 1979, exactly 11 months after the disappearance of Therese Laure, Jean Charland was also sentenced to life imprisonment for the murders of Grimard and Bergeron. It's hard to understand why. There was only one weapon used to shoot Grimard. The issue was simple. Either Charland shot him or Laplante, but not both. Sherbrooke Justice seemed to be working an angle of, well, something like that happened, so let's convict them both and move on. Charland's lawyer, Richard Marcheterre, registered a review, but unlike Laplante, Charland's appeal was met with a very different outcome. The prosecution's case hinged on their chief witness, Luc Landry's testimony of how Charland had told him at the Moulin Rouge how he peppered Grimard in an alley along Wellington Street. In 1981, the Quebec Court of Appeal overturned the judgment, and Charland was set free. The 3 judges on the appeal board regarded Landry's testimony as hearsay. Wasn't Charland's testimony against Laplante hearsay? And they unanimously believed that nothing in the evidence linked Charland to the victims. I guess they needed more dots to connect than the rifle used to murder Grimard stashed in Charland's house. Oh, and that log. It was an unprecedented victory for Charland's youthful attorney, Richard Marcheterre, who commented it was the first time in Quebec he remembered that the judges unanimously came to a decision on the grounds that the evidence was unreasonable. La Tribune reported that it was, quote, extremely rare for the Court of Appeal to reverse a verdict in this way, ordering a new trial in many cases instead. Rare indeed. What unknown persons intervened on Charland's behalf? Although police dryly noted that Charland had been liberated like air, and so it was. While Fernand Laplante languished in Dorchester prison for over 40 years, Charland went back to his regular Lennoxville routine of arsons and robberies, and the community turned a blind eye to it all. On the same day that Charland's conviction was overturned, and in what the Sûreté du Québec must have considered a fait accompli, La Tribune reported that the Quebec Police Commission dismissed complaints made by Robert Bulak of police misconduct during the Laplante process. Bulak had been railing now for 2 years that Jean Charland had been granted immunity in exchange for his testimony against Laplante. Nobody listened. In what La Tribune called, quote, the last drops of the flood of complaints against the SQ, the police commission determined there were no grounds for a public inquiry and asked Quebec police to try to avoid acts of recklessness in the future. Jean Charland picked up where he had left off, and for the next decade became more of a public nuisance than a menace to the townships. Less than 7 months after his acquittal, and almost 3 years to the day of Tricolor's disappearance, Jean and his younger brother Marc Charland, the one-time boyfriend of Carole Facteau, were arrested for smashing the front glass of the Sinclair bowling alley just north of the Moulin Rouge. Constable Rodrigue caught up with the brothers in a Wellington alley, hiding under an iron staircase. When asked what they were doing, they replied, "Nothing. We are waiting." Imagine Richard Marcheterre's excitement when he was also handed this case. And if you go to theresalore.com, theresalore.com, and see the map, there's a link to the map there. I would say the real estate on Wellington Street is now, we're running out of space. There's too many plot points. Getting kind of crowded up there. I think that says it all. Someone might want to take a look at that. 4 months later, in March 1982, Charland was back in the courts again, this time for breaking into his father's restaurant, Chez Charles on Lennoxville's Queen Street. By now, he had long departed with the disco coif he sported during his murder trial, falling back on long hair and a jean jacket as he faced the magistrate. When his father, Yvan Charland, noticed $680 missing from the till, he had no trouble calling Lennoxville Police Chief Leo Hamel to arrest his son. The zealous Hamel even conducted an investigation with the cooperation of 2 Sûreté du Québec agents. Charland had only just been placed on probation for another burglary of a township's garage. By now, Charland had a new attorney, Michel Beauchemin, who pleaded with Judge Roberge to consider that Charland was dealing with a drug and alcohol problem. No doubt. Prosecutor Claude Melanson, remember him from the Laplante trial, said that drink was irrelevant and Charland had violated his probation. La Tribune was quick to note that Fernand Laplante's appeal to the Supreme Court of Canada had been denied, while Charland, accused of the same murders, was set free by a lower Quebec court. For the townships, Jean Charland had become the gift that kept on giving. Look, I'm no investigative genius. I simply, frankly, possess some good analytical skills, and I'm able to sometimes take apart and reassemble a lot of data, a lot of complex information. When considering suspects in my sister's case, it seemed like a fairly good assumption that you would not focus on persons who had recently been accused or convicted of similar crimes. And my thinking with that was that the justice process would eliminate those persons for consideration since they had now transitioned to the courts or were either in jail or prison or at the very least under a watchful eye of police. So you would assume, right? That sort of reasoning collapses when considering someone like Jean Charland and a police force like the Sûreté de Québec, who completely defy logic. So the thinking would go that Charland was not party to Theresa's murder because he was on trial for a previous murder and therefore in jail, right? Except that he wasn't in jail. He was free. He was living at his parents' house in Lennoxville, where Theresa was last seen, and he escaped notice until the night of the Aloha Motel fire, November 10th, 1 week after Theresa's disappearance. How could police miss such an important detail? Unless they didn't want to call attention to it. They didn't want it noticed by anyone. There was a story that ran in La Tribune the summer of 1995 about a motorcycle competition that was occurring over a long weekend and local concern that biker gangs such as the Hells Angels might be overrunning it. And this is an old story. These cries for vigilance crop up from time to time. 25 years earlier, practically the same article ran in La Tribune about a summer bike competition that involved the Gitans, the forerunners of the Hells. Boboy Beaulieu was even interviewed. We talked about this in Father Jean Salvé, the biker priest of Sherbrooke. Reporter Danielle Forgue canvassed the audience to check the temperature of participants, and he interviewed someone named Jean Charland, who was identified as a fan attending the entire day of competition. And this is this Jean Charland. I was sitting right next to a guy from the Evil Ones. It didn't bother him, and he did the same. And I didn't stop myself from yelling and telling jokes about them. They too are there to see the motorcycles. Of course, it helps to be so complacent about these matters if you yourself are possibly connected and a member of the Hells Angels who transitioned from the Gitans, if in fact this was our Jean Charland. The Gitans' Jean Charland, the one we've been talking about, the one involved in 1978 murders, who set fire to the Aloha Motel, who became a public vagrant, died 3 years later in Sherbrooke on July 30th, 1998. He was 39. He looked 60. Someone told me that he died of AIDS. If he had anything further to say of what went on in the Eastern Townships in 1978, he took his secrets with him. There was no deathbed confession that we know of from Jean Charland. Very early on, when I started the website Who Killed Theresa, I wrote about the Fernand Laplante trial. I had read about it in Allo Police annual almanac. And I posted these photos of Laplante, Charland, Grimard, Bergeron, and Robert Bulak, typefaced with this garish red background that only Hello Police can do. And this was sometime around the early 2000s. Almost immediately, I got a call from my father asking me to take it down. He told me that an old college friend of his, who had been friends with Laplante, had been contacted by, quote, some people in British Columbia. When I pressed them on who it was, it became obvious that he was referring to members of organized crime. Bikers who the college friend was acquainted with, apparently, who suggested it would be in my best interests if I did not write about such things. I'm an obedient son, so I did what I was told. I took the story down. And I will note that in 1978, my parents had no knowledge of any of the murders that had occurred earlier in the year prior to Theresa's disappearance. Not Grimard and Bergeron, not Facto, not even Manon Dubé. This information was withheld from them by police, and they were living outside of Quebec. Their local news would not have covered such stories. It's doubtful police even made the connection with these cases themselves at the time. Or is it? We shall see. Years later, just before he died, I asked my dad again about this episode. By this time, his college friend had passed, so I was hoping to get some more information, perhaps the true nature of his urgency. But my father changed the story. Now it wasn't bikers from BC. It was simply that the college friend had known Fernand Laplante, and now that he was out on parole, he wanted to see that he got a fresh start. So a nice story. He didn't want me dredging up the past. It would be better that I not talk about such things and leave the past to memory. My father only ever lied on rare and exceptional occasions. It's not my memory that's faulty. I know what my father said the first time. This is who killed Theresa. If you like the podcast, please follow us on social media. We're on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, YouTube, Substack. You can find all that good information on the website, theresaallore.com. TheresaAllore.com. That's all for today. This has been Who Killed Theresa. I am your host, John Allore. Have yourselves a great day.